Tensions were quite high around our apartment complex when I was the age of 10 or so. Within a month's time, we'd had a man that committed suicide in a unit, a partial fire in a building leading to reconstruction, and a child that had been hit by a car as well. Even at a younger age, I remember distinctly having a strong grasp on the bizarre events that were taking place. This was all around spring in 1997. My mother was single and raising my sister, who was about 5 years old then, and I. She managed a different complex and would pick us up from school and drop us off at our apartment while she returned to work for a couple of more hours. I also have 3 older siblings, but they'd all moved out at this time. They'd all had to keep an eye on each other at a young age as well, so this wasn't really a new premise. There was no money for a sitter, and the oldest just had to assume the role, which I guess at this time was me. For the most part, we were really quiet kids. We played with our toys, watched a little television, and sometimes played Sega or Nintendo. This particular afternoon, I recall playing with a Dash Rendar figurine from Star Wars, while my sister was doing whatever in the same living room. Suddenly, the doorknob started to violently shake. My heart dropped immediately. I remember it being the first time I had really felt so scared. I rushed to the phone and paged my mom 911, then dialed 911 to let the operator know someone was trying to break in. The operator reassured me that help was on the way. The door handle was still being messed with all the while. I was nervous as to whether the deadbolt and chain would be enough to stop this person. A bunch of loud bangs happened, as if someone were trying to ram the door in with their shoulder. Then it all just stopped. The cops arrived shortly before my mom, only to find a note from the maintenance man saying something like air filter check. Now, the maintenance man claimed that he had announced himself verbally, but I knew that was bullshit. Of course, the cops did nothing, and my mom's complaint to the office didn't yield in this man being fired. Unfortunately, that's not even the most unnerving part of the story either. My mom said after that the guy would just stare her down in the parking lot and smile at her. The whole situation creeped us out. We wanted to move, but we couldn't afford the expenses. One night, a couple of weeks later, I was suddenly awakened by a loud thud coming from the rooftop. Being so easily rattled from the previous event not long before, I ran to my mom's room to wake her up. She checked around to make sure everything was in place and reassured me it was probably just a rodent. We went to school the next morning and were dropped off at home in the afternoon as usual. My mom usually did a quick sweep of the place even before the attempted break-in, but this time when she looked, something felt off. There was just a very uneasy feeling in the apartment when walking in. My sister and I were ordered to stay downstairs by the front door while she investigated upstairs. We waited there patiently and felt very unnerved when suddenly our mother's shrieking confirmed our suspicion. She came barreling down the stairs and pushed us out the door. We went to a neighbor's and phoned the police. I remember hearing my mother barking through the phone that someone was in our apartment. The police responded pretty quickly. I was finally able to understand the situation. The bedroom had a walk-in closet that contained the hatch to the attic that connected the building's AC and heat. There were shelves that were pretty high up lining the closet walls. My mother had walked in to find a dirty pair of men's underwear laying in the floor. This was enough to send her running and phoning the police. However, the investigation revealed something even more. The attic hatch had been disturbed. Just to add, the police also found handprints on the shelves in the closet. The noises I'd heard the previous night were more than likely this man hoisting himself back into the crawl space, using the shelves to climb up after visiting us. The man was taken into custody, but I don't recall what the exact sentencing was. Coincidentally, my older brother is actually a police officer in the area. We ended up moving into my grandmother's house shortly thereafter. Growing up, I lived in a decent-sized middle-class apartment complex. This took place around 1988 and 1990. I was around 4 or 5 when it happened. Since there was only one driveway in and out of the complex, my mother pretty much let me roam around by myself from a very young age. My court or block of apartments was the first one you passed when entering the complex, and my apartment was about 100 feet away from it. I wasn't supposed to leave the court unless my mom knew whose place I was going to. I was a very curious and precocious child, and very social as well. I remember my mom often called me the mayor because I knew a good number of people in the complex. I did have a few run-ins with creeps, weirdos, and a definite pedo or two over the years living there, but nothing that ever escalated into any sort of worrisome incident. My parents were both pretty tough growing up and educated me early on with street smarts and self-defense. They said it was okay to talk to strangers in certain situations because, of course, not everyone is bad. They taught me the importance of someone who might help me and someone who might be a danger to me. We at one point had this particularly ugly and fairly creepy ice cream man. He had a Billy Ray Cyrus type spiky mullet and always wore tank tops and had really bad acne. At the time, I thought he must have been in his 40s, but looking back, he was probably in his early 20s. He loved to talk to other kids about wrestling a lot. I went to his truck once, along with my friends when he was parked outside the pool. I didn't have enough money to buy anything, so I went to leave. He gave it to me anyway though, for whatever money I did have. I didn't like the way that he too friendly smiled at me though. Whenever I'd hear the ice cream man, I'd peek out the window to see which guy it was pulling into the complex, and only if it wasn't him, I'd go and get my ice cream. I don't know how much time passed between my first encounter with him and the last, but in between, there were many occasions where I was coming home or going to a different court for whatever reason. Whenever I happened to be walking down the main drive, he'd just pull up next to me on the sidewalk out of nowhere. I'd pretend he wasn't there and cut through the court while hiding. He'd always holler after me, "Why are you so scared of me? I'm nice, you're making me feel bad." One day, my mom said I couldn't leave the court for whatever reason I can't remember. My friend lived in the corner apartment of the court after mine, so I sat on the court's corner nearest to hers, and she sat on her corner. We were talking in between, tossing toys to each other across the parking lot. At this point though, I heard the ice cream man. Even though I was at the other end of my block, he saw me when he pulled in. He started to drive right towards me. I ran and hid in my court until he moved further into the complex. I waited for what felt like forever until I didn't hear the music anymore. I walked back to the corner and my friend had gone back inside already. I picked up whatever toys I had left behind, but as I turned to start walking home, I noticed the ice cream man was sitting in the parking lot of the court across the main drive, just sitting there in his truck with the music off. I dropped what I was holding. Before I could even pick it back up, he was already directly across the street from me, parked once more. "Hi there, what's your name? Can we be friends? I feel bad I scared you. I'm a real nice guy, you know." I remember his hair was particularly greasy that day. I was just so repulsed by him. My legs locked up because I was so scared. Mentally, I was trying to decide if I'd have a better chance escaping through the woods or chancing it down the main drive. "Oh, I can't have friends. My mom said so." "Oh, is that so? I feel bad for you. Come on, let me give you a free ice cream." My mom said I can't have ice cream either." "Okay, well, if you come over here, you can have candy or soda or a snap bracelet." Sorry, I'm too scared to cross the street." "That's okay, I'll come over to you. You can ride in the truck and play the music if you want." I realized this back and forth was going to be a losing battle for me. I decided the best thing to do was play along. "Okay, if you turn the truck around, I won't have to cross the street so my mom won't get mad." He'd have to leave and immediately re-enter the complex to do that. It would at least buy me 20 to 30 seconds. He was way too excited as he pulled off. I took off running though. I got home and my mom was on the phone with my dad who was out of state for the day. I told her what happened. She made me tell my dad as well. and they both told me how proud of me they were. After that, unless I was out of town, I avoided the ice cream men at all costs. I just hope I was the only kid he tried to bait, and that no one else had an experience with him that was worse. Throughout my life, I've experienced many unusual and often unpleasant situations. For privacy reasons, I don't want to give away too much information about myself, but I will say I'm a 21-year-old girl now living in Ireland, where I've lived over 5 years. I grew up in a small Eastern European country, of which about 40% are Russian, and I'm of Russian descent as well. Even though almost everyone in my country spoke fluent Russian and much of the population had Russian relatives, ethnic tensions within this country were very high. It was not uncommon for you to receive a lower salary or worse treatment in shops and other public places if the place was run by natives. It's because of this I believe I was singled out as a target in this particular story. That and my feeble appearance as well, as I've always been quite short and skinny. My neighborhood, like any other in the area, consisted of many blocks of Soviet apartments, remnants of the USSR, rotting away but nevertheless housing hundreds of people. It was a good enough neighborhood, all things considered, and I would not have called my family particularly poor. The building we lived in, though, was rather bleak. The hallway was always dark and stank of piss or other bodily excretions. The building was quite tall and had this old creaky elevator which smelled no better than the hallway itself and often scared you into thinking it was about to break. This, however, was still more favorable than climbing the even darker sets of stairs, which often had people sleeping in them or groups of teenagers gathering to do drugs. The layout of the place is unimportant, but I believe the description of the shadiness will set the scene. After a year or two of living in this building with little occurrences aside from stumbling upon the occasional stoner with a knife trying to rob me for drug money, or a drunk passed out in front of my apartment, I started to notice these two native kids hanging around the neighborhood, a girl and a boy. At first, they never really spoke to me, and I paid little mind to them either. I would often notice as time went on them staring at me whenever I passed by, or gazing out from a distance as I played with the other neighborhood kids. These kids seemed weird to say the least. They spoke a limited amount of Russian and pretty much never interacted with anyone else. They would always just stand there watching me. Despite them being very similar looking, nobody knew if they were related or just two weirdos living in the building who'd stumbled upon each other. I remember always just assuming they must be brother and sister. After a while of this not-so-casual staring, they began to harass me on my walk home. They'd tease me, push me, just generally attempt to get on my nerves with what little Russian insults they knew. I had a pretty thick skin, so this didn't really bother me too much though. I would either completely ignore them or fight back with what I thought were rather witty comebacks. These kids were absolutely relentless though. Over time, I began to wonder why they decided to randomly pick on me so much. I had never said a single word to them before. I'd never played with them in any significant amount. I really didn't know them at all. I decided to settle for the "they must just be a bit weird" explanation. Nevertheless, this was all just teasing, right? Kids just being kids. One day on my walk home, though, the strange duo were on my heels as usual. The boy making some crude comments about my nationality and how I should go home back to Russia. Lots of other unrelated insults as well, while the girl also mocked me. I did my best to ignore their behavior, not feeling in the mood to dignify them with a clever comeback this time. It became increasingly difficult. It seemed in frustration the two had suddenly become much more aggressive than usual. All the other times this would go on, they just give up and leave me alone after a while. But this time, to my surprise, they followed me into my building and into that poorly lit, stinky hallway. Still ignoring them, I pressed the button for the elevator when I felt the boy roughly grab me from behind. I was in shock. The girl joined him, bending my arm at an incredibly uncomfortable position behind my back. "What the hell are you doing?" I screamed at them. They began attempting to drag me into the black staircase, telling me to shut the fuck up. I struggled, of course, not really understanding what had suddenly come into these two. I mean, I knew they were weird, but this was something else. This didn't feel like childhood bullies or kids just being kids. These two had something sinister on their minds. As I struggled against their duo grip, trying to break my way free and towards the elevator that had now arrived, a middle-aged woman walked into the hallway. A look of confusion was on her face as she asked, "Is anyone going up?" I desperately called out that I was, reaching for the elevator, only to hear the guy holding me snarl, "You're not going anywhere." To my surprise, despite the pure desperation in my voice and the fact I was fighting two seemingly older kids trying to drag me away, the woman didn't do anything. She didn't even ask what was going on, just shrugged her shoulders and walked into the elevator and closed the doors. What was going through her mind still makes me curious. I assume this was probably due to assuming this was nothing serious because of our age. Perhaps her not wanting to get involved any more than she already had in order to avoid trouble. After all, our neighborhood was not the safest. Best to stay out of things whenever you can. Luckily, her leaving became a surge of adrenaline, partially from my desire to get into that elevator and away from these two, and partially from anger at her refusing to do anything. It's amazing what the human body can do when faced with a dangerous situation. Using all of my strength, I whipped around and slammed the boy into the wall behind me, immediately making both of them let go of me. I could tell the two of them were as shocked as I was at what I had just done. As I said, I was a fairly small girl, but it felt as though someone else had possessed me in that moment. All I knew is I had to get away from this dark area. As soon as I was let go, I ran to the elevator and managed to get the doors open again and inside. The last thing I remember seeing is the doors slamming shut before we took off, the girl's shocked expression as she stared at me. The lady in the elevator didn't say a word to me, didn't even look at me. I wish I could say it ended there. A few days later, I was confident in my ability now to defend myself against those two, and was pretty sure they would not attempt to attack me again, or even go near me. That relief, however, was fairly short-lived. A friend of mine knocked on my door at the usual time I would go out on a free day, asking me to hang out. I, of course, excitedly agreed, and as soon as I was ready, we headed out and to the elevator. As mentioned previously, the elevator itself was not all that sturdy and would easily break down. That's not the only thing that made it extremely unsafe, though. If you were a child and were taking the elevator alone, especially in a building as tall as ours where there were many, many floors, you never knew what the person who got on with you turned out to be, or what they could do to you, especially if the elevator suddenly got stuck. This wasn't something that happened often enough to prevent us from using it and instead take those dreaded stairs. We got on without a worry in the world and pressed the button for the ground floor. We began chatting about nothing in particular. About 4 floors down, though, the elevator stopped, letting on a burly middle-aged man. Just the sight of him was intimidating. He had this sunken-in face and long black greasy hair, sweat stains under his arms. His belly was so fat it took up most of the room in that tiny elevator, pushing my friend and I into a corner. We just kind of fell silent. At first, the man said nothing, just stared at the two of us as the elevator door slowly closed. I could tell that much like myself, my friend had an uneasy feeling about this man. In a deep, hoarse voice, he leaned in and said slowly and calmly, "Oh, you think you're so tough, don't you?" It was more of a statement than a question. I could tell it was directed at me. He pressed the elevator stop button, screeching it to a halt. He reached out and grabbed me by the fringe. He pinned me against the wall of the elevator, still holding on and beginning to pull me up. I could feel some strands of my hair ripping out of my skull as I was being lifted. However, not enough for my feet to lose contact with the ground. I squealed in pain, and my friend watched in shock, cowering into the corner, unable to do anything. "Well, I can be tough too." I began to try and make him let go of my hair to no avail. The more I moved, the more my fringe ripped out, and the more painful it became. Eventually, I stopped struggling, and attempted to stand up on my tippy toes as much as I could. "You think it's funny to hurt my son, huh?" For a second, I had no idea what he was on about, but then I realized. The boy I had slammed against the wall in an attempt to get away. He must have told his parents what happened, most likely neglecting to include the fact he had attacked me first. Or maybe he had and his father just didn't give a shit. He seemed like a piece of crap himself. "I know what floor you live on. If you ever touch my son again, I'll bring a knife through your throat in this fucking elevator. You understand me?" Before I could respond, it began to move again. Someone must have called it onto another floor. He narrowed his eyes at me and let go of my hair, standing back and acting as if nothing had happened. We stopped and another person got on a few floors down. The rest of the ride was spent in silence. I don't know what was scarier, the fact this clearly insane man was threatening my life, and the fact his equally loopy son stalked me without my knowledge to find out what floor I lived on and what my routine was, just to get his psycho dad to threaten me. I work at a retail store and I detest my job with all my heart. Because I was a dumb shit and said I was always available though, they'd routinely fuck me over and put me on nights. I whine and bitch and moan and digress. I'm okay working nights since I get to see my boyfriend when he picks me up at least. Boyfriend usually gets off at 10:30, but he doesn't leave until 11. Most nights I'd have to wait for him to arrive. On top of that, he had to make a 10-minute drive as well, so I'd have to wait around an hour and 40 to 45 minutes. That didn't really bother me that much though. He'd call to tell me he was coming and make sure I was still alive at least. Earlier in the week, an Uber driver had kept on asking me if I was someone named Lenore. I told him no, and he did it again, but this time kept asking if I was sure. How the fuck am I not gonna be sure of my name? Fortunately, at that moment, my boyfriend pulled in and honked at me, causing this Uber creep to speed away. I'm a paranoid penny, so this made me wonder if he'd been watching me or something, and knew my boyfriend always came late. Then I tweaked out, since I'd kept on getting these weird phone calls from a telemarketing agency or something. Whenever I'd answer though, no one was there, and they'd hang up immediately. Was this connected? Was the government watching me? Did I only have 7 days left to live? Well, fast forward 3 days later, and I'm just standing there listening to some music, waiting for him to pick me up and call me. He finally did and started cracking a joke about how he was glad the creepy Uber driver didn't answer. As we started chatting the shit with each other and joking around, suddenly this Indian woman walked up to me. I didn't hear what she was saying at first, since I had noise-canceling headphones. I could tell she was getting closer and closer though, and kept on calling out to me. Finally, her hey reached my ears. I looked over to her, smiled, and went back to talking to my boyfriend. She did it again though, so I excused myself. Yes, may I help you?" "Do you need a ride?" she asked. She looked nice enough, but something was off about her. Her car was parked at the stop sign, and I could see there was someone else in it. No, my friend is coming to pick me up right now, actually. Thank you." I noticed there was a man in the driver's seat, and she wasn't wearing a uniform from either of the stores near us. She started to ask me again. "Are you sure? I can give you a ride. Do you need a ride? Get in, come on, you need a ride, right?" I was beginning to feel a little uncomfortable. My preschool don't get in a stranger's car training kicked in. So I politely declined again and went back to talking to my boyfriend. "Hey, are you close?" "I just pulled out. I'll get there. Just stay on the line. That woman's gone now, right?" No, she was not gone. In fact, she was standing 6 feet away glaring at me. She looked very annoyed. I told him in code that no, she had not left. She had in fact remained there leaning on the car watching me. She was looking angrier with each passing second as well. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the man tell her something. She looked at me and began to interrogate me. "Your friend's not here. You need a ride? Where's your friend? He probably forgot about you. That's okay, we'll take you where you need to go. It's cold, come on, tell us where you live, we'll drop you off." At this point, she got closer to me. I tried to avoid her by moving to the farther end of the plaza strip. Honey? Yeah, so about my sister? She's gotten closer, but I'm pretty scared she's too far away from home. Something might happen. Hurry so I can tell you. I said a code as the car drove up next to me. Now she looked extremely pissed. Get in the car now. At this point, she opened the car and began trying to push me inside, pulling me, yanking on my jacket. She was a taller and bigger woman than me, so she even tried to pick me up. At this point, I'm pretty sure my bowels threatened to release. I was screaming and kicking and wiggling. Meanwhile, I could hear through the phone him yelling that he was on his way and he was calling the police. Now my mind was running 1,000 miles an hour. I was panicking, thinking I was going to be raped or presented as some weird present for her husband. He looked very content with her efforts to kidnap me. Get in! Shut up! I will hit you! I started crying as she managed to push my torso into the car. My right hand was locked to my phone. She began trying to pull it out of my hand. My boyfriend was panicking, telling me the police were sending an officer right now. She shoved my face into the leather seat. My airway was obstructed, and she was not letting me go. She was bigger than me, stronger than me, and she knew it. Her whole weight was pressing onto me. I tried not to panic so I didn't black out from lack of oxygen. All of a sudden, I started getting mad as shit. Her husband said something in Punjabi. She lifted one hand up and leaned down, trying to get something out of the front. Immediately, I used the arms I'd been using to push myself off the seat to jab her in the stomach. She recoiled, letting go of me a little. I headbutted her, tossing my melon back as I screamed, fear-stricken and adrenaline-hazed. Finally, my boyfriend pulled in. I bolted to his car as the Indian woman was sitting stunned on the ground. After I shut the door, he sped off towards his house. When we got inside, I broke down, babbling about how scared and terrifying it all was, and how if I hadn't had that opportunity, she might have taken me to her house and done God knows what. After this incident, the police officer they dispatched got there 20 minutes later, and of course didn't find anyone. My boyfriend talked to his boss and was granted the ability to leave early to come get me. I'm still weirded out by cars stalling in the plaza,